Word together. We're going to be continuing our study of the book of Daniel as we look at the second chapter of that book. And so if you have your Bibles with you, which I hope you do, turn there to Daniel chapter 2. And as you're turning there in your Bible, I want us to begin with a question. And the question is the title of the message today. Do you believe that God is in control? Do you believe that God is in control? I want us to go more than just to that step of asking the question, though. I want us to then consider, if I really believe that, what are some implications of that belief? What are some things that I ought to really ask myself or make those statements of commitment if I really do believe God is in control in my life? And so we're going to look at 4 different statements or prayers even that ought to follow this belief that, yes, I believe God is in control. The first one is this: help me to pay attention. Help me to pay attention, to see how God is working all around me. Help me to be real, transparent in my victories and in my struggles. Help me to trust, believing that if God is in control, it impacts the way I live my life. And then the last one, help me to serve. If I really trust Him, then it's going to impact the way I serve Him. See, I want us to look today at this continuing story of Daniel. And today we're going to look at the second chapter here, and it's the story of Nebuchadnezzar. And just to kind of set the stage a little bit, we talked last week in the beginning chapter of all that was taking place. You'll remember that our key character Daniel and his friends and a number of the key young leaders of the time, they were carried off into captivity into a foreign land named Babylon under a king named Nebuchadnezzar. We talked about the fact that this was a perfect strategy because these were the up and rising stars. And if he could convince them to follow after him in this new culture, well, he's certain there would be no revolt. Well, in the story, as we began last week, we learned a little bit about Daniel, Azariah, and their new names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, really, as you know them better. We learned that they had a commitment, a resolve. They were going to serve the Lord. And we're going to see this unfold more and more in the weeks to follow. And so they resolved they were going to be faithful to their God. And so the story now continues here in chapter 2. We're going to see Daniel continues in that faithfulness, that desire to seek after the Lord, that resolve that we began with last week. And as we consider this idea of God being in control, we're going to see it in our first point. This first prayer, help me to pay attention. If you truly are in control, help me to pay attention to how you're working and moving. Look there at the beginning of chapter 2. We're going to look just at verse 1 as we begin here. It says this: Now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. I want us to stop just right there as we begin. This idea of God being in control. I want us to consider this dream that took place with Nebuchadnezzar so strong that it shook him out of his sleep. Now, I don't know how many of you this morning would say you remember your dreams. How many of you say most days you can remember what you dreamed the night before? How many would say that? Just here and there, maybe about 30% of you would say you remember your dreams. I would be in the category of not raising my hand. Most mornings when I wake up, I can't tell you what I dreamed. And I was thinking, am I normal? Am I abnormal here? Well, I was reading that 95% of your dreams are gone within about 5 minutes of waking up. That's why when you're going through classes, maybe your teacher said, write down your dreams. We're going to talk about psychology and all the dreams issues. Well, 95% of it is gone within a few minutes because when your mind is working and active in dreams, researchers say that the frontal part of your brain, which is a part of your short-term memory, is completely inactive. And so your mind is racing in one direction or another, and maybe by the morning you think, I'm exhausted, and I don't even know why. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, when he woke up that morning, he remembered the dream. He knew exactly what he had dreamed, so much so that it stirred him up. And the text speaks about how he reacted to this dream. It says that he was troubled in his spirit. It shook him up, and it really has the idea that his dream struck him. And maybe you've experienced this right in that moment when you're just going to sleep, not in this service, but right when you get into that perfect place of slumber and your body jumps. You ever experienced that? Your body jerks right as you get to that place of, oh, I'm finally relaxing, and you jump. Well, this was no jerking leg reaction here that brought him to to his full awake state here. It was a dream that stirred him, and he knew this was no ordinary dream. This was a dream that has meaning. And he longed to find out, what is the significance of everything I've just experienced? The text says, his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Now we can look at it and say, well, it was a cultural thing, and that's the case in Babylon in that time period. Their culture believed that there was great authority given to dreams, and so anytime you dreamed something, there had to be meaning behind it. Aren't you glad that all of your dreams don't have significance for your real life? Maybe you dreamed some strange things at times. Well, in Nebuchadnezzar's time period, he believed, along with his contemporaries, that if you dreamed something, it had significance, and so it was a cultural thing. As we look at the story, and next week we're going to unpack a lot of this dream, what I realize is this was no dream just to be unpacked for the culture's sake. This was a God-ordained moment. Because in this moment, God was in control, and He used even a dream by a king, Nebuchadnezzar, to bring Daniel to the forefront so that he could be that leading individual with that resolve to faithfully serve the Lord. As I was thinking about how God used a dream with Nebuchadnezzar, I was thinking about how else has God used dreams throughout Scripture in order to reveal His plan and His purpose. I thought about all the way back in the beginning in Genesis. One of the first stories of dreams being used by God was the story of Jacob. As he was fleeing from Esau, he was lying down, it was time for him to rest, and he began to dream about a ladder going up to heaven, and angels were ascending and descending on this ladder. A picture of the power of God and the presence of God. Jacob needed that reminder. Joseph, not long later in Genesis, he had a dream. Wasn't quite as encouraging to all those around him, because when he shared his dream, he said, "Brothers, you're going to bow down to me." Now, I was the youngest of 3 boys. You can imagine how well that would have gone over if I'd have shared that with my 2 older brothers. Got something to share with you? God gave me a dream. You're bowing down to me. They would have beat me up immediately. It wouldn't have been good. Well, Joseph's brothers, they had the same reaction. They said, "We're getting rid of you. Forget this dream, all this idea of grandeur that you have." But God had a purpose, because He said, they're going to bow down to you. You know the end of the story. They came pleading for food in the story as they came to Egypt, and God used that to remind them that He truly was with His chosen people, even in that time of captivity in Egypt that would unfold as the story continues. So God has used dreams throughout the Old Testament, even into the New Testament. We're going to talk about wise men here in chapter 2 of Daniel. But we know in the Christmas story, we also talk about those descendants here. Those wise men, just the same as these, came to see the baby Jesus, the Messiah. And as they were leaving to go back, a dream, an angel told them, go back a different way. Don't go back to Herod, because he has evil plans and intentions. And so they understood in a dream God's plan. Look at Matthew chapter 2. You see one dream after another for Joseph and Mary as they were fleeing to Egypt and returning back from Egypt. God certainly has used all kinds of ways to get the attention of His children. Now, why do I say all that? And I don't want you to go home and start thinking the one way God is going to speak is in my dreams. He may choose to do that. But what I realize as I see this story is that God can use any number of ways to get the attention of His children. As I thought about that, the prayer that then follows is this: help me to pay attention. Lord, whatever it is you're trying to speak to me, whatever you're trying to reveal to me individually, as a church, whatever it might be, as a family, help me to pay attention. God, if I believe you're in control, if I believe you can work in any number of ways you see fit, help me not to miss it in my life. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, he went to sleep that night without any thought that he might experience something supernatural, but God used a dream in order to reveal to him an individual more than anything, Daniel, an individual that would be used by God because he decided he was going to live with great resolve. So the first prayer that I think we need to pray as we look at this idea of God being in control is that prayer, help me to pay attention. But Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't seek out Daniel at first. He sought out some of the other wise men. And as he began to plead with them, tell me the dream, tell me what it means, well, he exposed very quickly that these wise men really were phonies. They didn't know inkling of an idea of how to explain this dream. And as I consider that, I want us to look at our second point then. If God is in control, then our prayer is this: help me to be real. Help me to be real. Look there in your Bibles in chapter 2. We're going to pick up at verse 2. It says, "Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I've had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap." It's a way to motivate your employees, right? "However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore tell me the dream and its interpretation." He answered again and said, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation." The king answered and said, "I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation." The Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There's not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It's a difficult thing that the king requests, and there's no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not in the flesh." For this reason, the king was angry and very furious and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Now, the king gives a pretty strong order here. He tells them that your plan, your simple assignment, rather, is you tell me what the dream means. They say, well, we've got one problem. We don't know the dream. Well, you can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to cover up for the fact they don't really know what to tell him. And, before we get on to the king here, because he sought out the magicians and astrologers, essentially the wise men of the time, I was reading, maybe some of you were guilty of calling psychic hotlines about 10 years ago. They were real common back then. Well, I was reading that as late as 2 years ago, it was still a $2 billion industry. I was reading some of the tactics they use to try to keep you on the phone just a little bit longer, and by asking you certain questions, they can keep getting information from you and kind of pinging off of that in order to keep on trying to convince you they know something. Well, the wise men have been doing that for many, many years, because all the way back here in the story, they were waiting for the king to say, well, here's my dream. And you imagine what they were about to do. They were about to begin the cover-up story. Now, I imagine many of our students have worked well at the cover-up story. Maybe it's your homework didn't quite get done as you had planned, or you didn't quite prepare for the test as you had planned, and so you begin the cover-up, just like the wise men did. Well, I was reading some of those cover-up statements by students, none of these used by our own students. But here's one of them. It said, I didn't do my history homework because I don't like dwelling on the past. I love that. I wish I'd have had that one in my mind. I would have done my homework, but I spent the night at a rally supporting higher pay for our hard-working teachers. I love that. I would have done it, but I just didn't find it challenging enough. Well, I don't know what the cover-up story is you used when you were going through school, but here the wise men, many of these may have just come out of that training school that Daniel and his friends were going through, and they begin the cover-up. They realize, oh, wow, this is a big one. The threat is death, and if we don't cover up something here, we are surely in trouble. And so they asked the king, just tell us the dream. And you know what they're about to do. Well, this means this, and just kind of watch the king. See how he reacts. And begin to tell a little bit more. Why? Because they said without a doubt, there's no one that can tell this truth. There's no one that can tell this story except the gods, they said. Well, Daniel's about to enter the scene because there is one that could reveal the truth of that dream. It wasn't the gods, it was the one God. And in this moment, Daniel's about to enter into the scene, and the wise men were the phonies in the story. And as I thought about how they tried to cover up themselves, I thought about this statement, help me to be real. As I live out my faith, if I believe that God is in control, that He is active in my life, then I don't want to be like these wise men, trying to act like I have all the answers and I've always got it all together. Lord, help me to be real. Help me to be real about my victories. Help me to be real about my struggles. Help me to live out the commitment I believe as a church we can make in 2013, growing together. We're all desiring to grow in our faith, and these wise men, they tried to cover up that they didn't have all the answers. They couldn't tell the king what he was requesting. But as we live out our faith before the Lord, I say, Lord, help me to be real. You know, there were other individuals in the New Testament that tried to live out that cover-up faith. They tried to convince everybody else on the outside they were externally righteous. They were called the scribes and the Pharisees. Well, listen to what Jesus said about them. Matthew 15:8. These people draw near to me with their mouth, and they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Folks, as we consider our invitation, our resolution to worship the Lord, I pray that we would say, Lord, help me to be real. Help me to come before you and worship you, not with external righteousness, not trying to check off a list. Yep, went to church today. No, I long to live out my faith in everything that I believe, worshiping Him. The wise men, they began to try to cover up the story. They didn't know the answer to the king's request because it was something that only God could give in that moment. And so as we consider this, I want us to make one more commitment then. If I'm going to trust not in magicians, wise men in this culture, then I say I'm going to trust in the one true God. And that's when Daniel enters the story with our third point here. God is in control. Help me to trust you. Help me to trust you. Look in verse 14 as we continue the story. It says, Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. You know, as we look at the story here, Daniel was doing whatever was necessary to make sure that he and his friends wouldn't perish with those others that weren't willing to seek the one true God. He truly became the hero of the story. I imagine you remember just a few years ago, in 2009, the story of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, as Captain Sully, as he's known, Captain Sullenberger, as he made a maneuver after running into a flock of geese and damaging the engines, he turned and he landed the plane in the Hudson River. And what's even more amazing about the story is that although there were several passengers that were injured in the landing, none of them died. Not a single individual. And as he retired from flying, he now is regarded truly as a hero. His quick decision changed everything. You know, as I look at Daniel, I see that kind of quick decision. He rose to the top not just as an individual that was carried off into captivity. He truly was a leader. And why? Well, because he made a resolution. He was going to serve the Lord. That's what set Daniel apart. I think he probably had all kinds of great leadership qualities, but the greatest of all is that he made a resolution. He was going to be obedient to the Lord. And so Daniel, he rises to the top here. He is the leader among the group, and he begins to plead with the king's leaders. And then he says, I'm going to plead with the king. This decree, it's severe. I'm going to be the one that gives the interpretation. You know, as I look at this ability here of Daniel really to step up, it's a challenge for us to say, if I truly believe that God is in control, then I ought to be willing to say, God, help me to trust you. Help me to trust you. Help me to believe that you truly are on your throne and you truly are able to accomplish what only you could do. Not a wise man, astrologer, magician. Daniel was willing to say, I'm going to trust in the Lord. And as he did that, God was able to be glorified. You know, as I look at his story here, I see a number of different things, Daniel's willingness to trust really rises to the top. I was telling this last Sunday night about my adventure in rock climbing. Several of you heard that story. Going with friends while I was in seminary, they invited me, Amanda, we went to go and we were going to rock climb. And this wasn't indoor rock climbing with the padded surface at the bottom where you can bounce. This was outside, real rock climbing. Well, our friends, they had experience in doing rock climbing, and so they started hooking up all the ropes and getting all the gear ready. And it was fine to watch them while I was on the ground. It was quite another when they hooked me to the rope. Now, I had to trust, first of all, they hooked it up right. They hooked it up to something solid, and that they were going to hold me if I slipped. There was a whole new level of trust that day. Can you imagine that with Daniel? It's one thing to say, I resolve to serve the Lord. It's quite another to say, bring me before the king. I'm going to give the interpretation. You know, what I see in Daniel is an individual that said, help me to trust you. God, I believe that you're in control, but I need to pray today, God, would you help me to trust you more than anything? And Daniel exhibited that again and again. You know, I think we could say without a doubt, Daniel trusted God, and he walked by faith. Daniel trusted God, and he walked by faith. You see, I don't see any evidence in the text here that Daniel knew the answer before he gave the commitment, the resolution, I'm going before the king. You see, Daniel was willing to walk by faith even before he knew exactly how the whole story was going to unfold. But even greater than that, not only did Daniel walk by faith, but what I see in the text is that he invited others to join him in that journey. What's an amazing thing? When you look at the text here, it says he goes back to his friends, these committed individuals. He says, you come with me, you seek the Lord. What an amazing thing. And I thought about just our own conversations that we have on a daily basis. Are the words that I'm sharing leading others to greater faith or greater doubt? Think about that. The conversations you have on a daily basis as you talk about the joys and struggles of your faith, are you drawing people closer to the Lord, or are you pushing them away? Daniel faced a moment here, a moment of great decision, and he said, I'll be the one to go before the king. But he said, I'm not going alone because I need the Lord. And he went to others and he said, will you seek the Lord on my behalf? Intercede as I take this step. I'm stepping out by faith, but I need you to join me. You know, one of the greatest privileges I think we have as a church is Monday night, Tuesday morning, our Wednesday prayer time, our prayer room. We have folks here in this church that are committed to prayer. See, folks, I believe we can plan a lot of great things. We can think up of a lot of great ideas and visions of how we might do good things for God. But unless we take that step of saying, now, Lord, is this your plan? Is this your will? God, do you long to bless this? And if so, help us to seek you again and again and again. Daniel had a vision that he knew without a doubt. He was that individual resolved to go in. He prayed, help me to trust you, Lord. And why do I believe that? Because he sought the counsel of those around him. And he said, you seek the Lord. And so he said, help me to trust. He walked by faith, and then he invited others to walk with him. And when I thought about that statement, that idea of trust, here's what I thought about Daniel. I put this on the screen. When his situation around him tested him, Daniel resolved to walk by faith until the storm passed. I want us to really focus in on that statement. Look at that. When his situation around him tested him, Daniel resolved to walk by faith until the storm passed. You see, Daniel was in the midst of the storm. He was in the midst of all of the chaos of that moment, and Daniel didn't say, well, when this blows over, I'm going to really serve the Lord. If you can get me through this, boy, I'll commit my life to you. No, Daniel said, right now, in the midst of the storm, I'm resolving to walk by faith. You know, I think so many times we need that reminder that God is not necessarily interested in moving us past the storm as He is in building our faith while we're in the midst of the storm. Folks, we talked last week as we looked at chapter 1. Every storm that we walk through is not a move of Satan. At times, God takes us through a storm in order to grow our faith. And Daniel, in this moment, he didn't wait till the storm had passed to take that step of faith. He resolved, in this moment, even while I'm still in the midst of it, I'm going to serve the Lord. Help me to trust you. Maybe that's the prayer we need to make. as we look at the life of Daniel, as we seek to live out this series resolved, we say, God, we believe You're in control. Now just help me to trust You. I'm honest with You, Lord. I don't always trust You. I'm questioning, I doubt. Lord, help me to trust You. And as we continue in the story, we see that the obedience of Daniel changed everything. The obedience of Daniel allowed him to be an individual used by God. And we see that as we look at our final point, the challenge of Daniel here. God is in control. Help me to serve You. Look in verse 19. Let's carry down to verse 24. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision, again a dream, that Daniel was able to witness the power of God. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For wisdom and might are His. And He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with Him. I thank You and praise You, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of You. For You have made known to us the king's demand. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king's interpretation. As we look at this section here, we see that this brings the story to completion, that as Daniel was willing to say, God, help me to trust You, he then was able to live it out as he said, help me to serve You. He was the one willing to follow that plan all the way to its completion. As I look at this, I think we see, first of all, God heard the prayers of a righteous man. God heard the prayers of a righteous man. He prayed that God would use him, and God used him in a mighty way. God heard his prayers. But what's amazing to me is it's not just Daniel that takes the credit here. Daniel doesn't say, You heard me, You gave this to me. We see again and again in the text, You heard us. You see, they joined together in that journey. I think we miss that sometimes. As we pray through a situation and God heals an individual, God answers a prayer, and even in the far reaches of missionaries serving around the globe, as they are a part of God answering a prayer, we're a part of God answering that prayer. Daniel says, You gave the answer to us. As his friends joined with them, they became a part of the victory that God was revealing. They said, Help me to serve You. Their service wasn't going in before the king. His friends served in faithfully praying Daniel through his step of faith. Help me to serve You. God heard the prayers of a righteous man. But beyond that, I think also God heard the praise of a righteous man. Isn't it an amazing praise song that we see here as we look at this text here of that praise that goes up before the Lord? Look at verse 24. It says, Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. He walked with confidence. And as he walked with confidence, I believe it's because he recognized it wasn't through his strength, it was through God's. And we see that in his voice of praise. Folks, as we gather together on Sunday mornings here to worship, I pray that our time of singing isn't just a motion that we go through. Well, we have to do this in the order of worship. We do it in this order. We do this. All right, we've done that. Now it's time to preach. Folks, that's not the purpose of our praise. The purpose of our praise is to say, God, here's what's in my heart. I long to express it, and these songs are just a vehicle for allowing that to come out. And Daniel, he longed to share with God what he had seen, what he had witnessed, what God had accomplished through him, and it came out in a voice of praise. And as he sang out in praise, he then walked in confidence. You believe that Daniel thought God was in control? And when he looked around him, there was no outside evidence to say, yep, God's in control. We lost our country. I lost my family. I've been captured as a slave. I'm trying to be indoctrinated with a foreign culture. God's in control. There's nothing on the outside that should have said that. Everything on the outside said, we got trouble. Things are bad. Oh, no. But something inside was greater than what was going on all around him, and it was the presence of God carrying him through that storm. He resolved, I'm going to walk by faith, even in the midst of the storm, even until the storm passes. Help me to serve you. You know, as I look at this text, there are a number of commitments I believe we need to make. Help me to pay attention. God, don't let me miss how you're speaking and moving all around me. Maybe my eyes have been shut by the busyness of my world, and I say, God, help me to be like Daniel, sensitive to your leading, even before he had the answer. Help me to pay attention. Help me to be real. I don't want to put on a facade that everything is all wonderful in my life. No, I have joys, but I also have struggles. But I long to be real before the Lord, seeking His face each and every day. Help me to trust you. Maybe we need to say today, if I'm honest in my heart, there are times and there are areas in my life right now where I'm struggling to trust the Lord. And so we go before Him saying, help me to trust you, Lord. And as we do that, I believe we'll experience that final one. Help me to serve you. When his situation around him tested him, Daniel resolved to walk by faith until the storm passed. Let's pray together.